Hello Internet, welcome back to another episode of Wheelwork, and today we are working on the Calais skid car again. This episode is pretty much going to be mainly about doing some stuff to the auto, so we're just going to be working on the transmission in this, seeing how the morning progresses. If we have a little bit of time, I might do another thing on this that desperately needs to be done. I reckon I should have a bit of time, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But basically, I want to get this thing in and give the transmission a service and a flush. The transmission oil in it is black. It's quite bad. So doing a service isn't just doing a basic transmission service isn't really going to cut the mustard for the abuse that we're going to be giving it. So I want to flush it out, then give it a service, and also put a transmission cooler on it, which involves pulling the front of the car apart, and a few other little bits and pieces as well, which you will see. But first things first, we'll get it in, get it up on the hoist, and yeah, I'll show you what we're doing. So with the auto, how I'm flushing it is I've basically got that hose pointing into my little drain tray. I start the car up, let it pump out, and as soon as it starts like spurting oil rather than coming out as a constant flow, shut the car down and fill it up with some fresh stuff, and then do it again until it just starts to come a bit more red rather than the amazing black color that it is. And once we do that point, I will connect those lines up to the transmission cooler, and then we'll drop the pan and do the filter and stuff inside. Right, as for the transmission cooler side of things, so this is how I normally do it if you've got a fairly decent transmission cooler. So these hoses that I just slip these barbs into, they normally connect onto those two, which go into the radiator. So there is a little cooler in the side of the radiator that has got coolant going around it, and then the transmission all runs through it. They don't do too bad of a job, but it is being cooled by still fairly hot coolant. So if you've got a fairly decent transmission cooler, especially with a fan like what we've got, I just completely bypass the factory one in the radiator, and I'll connect these barbs. I'll cut these lines and put the brass barbs in them, and then I run transmission hose from there through this little gap here to the front of the car, which will go into the transmission cooler. So I've got those hoses back together there, and they just go through that little hole in the front, and I've just got them looped up in the front there for now. So once we get the pan back on, we can drop it down and take the front bar off and start doing the cooler. So that's good. I've got the pan off, that's all cleaned up, got a new filter in it, new Ryco filter, gaskets all laid on there, and I've also filled up the pan with a bottle of sauce. This Lucas Transfix stuff is absolute liquid gold. It is such good stuff. I've had slipping transmissions and stuff before, and this stuff is just fantastic. Because this transmission condition is an unknown, we know that it goes forwards and backwards, but we haven't driven it. I'm sort of not taking any chances. So that's why I've put a bottle of this stuff in it as well. And I'm also using a heavy duty Dextron 3 as well. It is a Burson brand, but this stuff is based on a Dextron 3, but it has friction modifiers in it and a higher boiling point. So that's what we have flushed the auto with. We've already put about 12 litres of that oil through the auto before we took the pan off. So yeah, we'll just put the pan back on, drop it down, fill up the auto, and then we can start doing the trans cooler. All right, one other thing I'm gonna do to the Calais while it's on the hoist is, as you can see, I've got the transmission and all that back together. I've also just dumped the engine oil too. Haven't changed the filter. I'm just going to do an oil change on it because the condition of this oil is unknown, and it has, as I said here, it's been a few years that this thing's been sitting. So just going to put some fresh oil in it, and once we get all of this stuff sort of fixed, then we can take the car for a little bit of a drive. We'll drive it around a bit, and then we'll do another oil change and do the filter. But one thing I want to do is change the engine mounts. So engine mounts are fairly common for failing on these. As you can see, these are sort of all cracked and falling apart. The other way you can tell is if you look at the sump in correlation to the cross member. So you can actually see that the sump is well below the cross member, and it's also getting really close to the cross member as well. When they fully fail, the engine sump ends up hitting the cross member. So these are a hydraulic filled mount from factory. This mount has actually popped and the hydraulic oil came out. I have washed it away when I pressure washed the engine, but that sort of surface rust that's around, that's from the hydraulic oil eating away the paint on the K-frame. So what we're going to do is change them with a set of these. These are standard replacement mounts, but they are just solid rubber. So they're have no hydraulic in them. So yeah, it is hydraulic oil encased in rubber from factory. These ones are just straight rubber, so they do take a bit more abuse. The only downside is you do get a little bit of vibration at idle with these. And you also can get solid steel mounts as well, which just shake the absolute snot out of the car. But considering with what we're going to be doing to the car, these will suffice more than enough. So we'll go through and get these in. The first thing you need to do is take off these 4 15mm nuts, which I've already done. Up in there and up in there each side. And then there's 2 more 15mm nuts per side. It's going to give us a bit more room now without the aircon on this side. But these inner ones up in here are a bit hard to get to, and I'll sort of show you how I get on them. So these inner bolts, what I do is I've actually got a 15mm spanner that I've cut down. And so the reason why I've done that is so when you swing it, it clears the side of the sump. And I sort of sit it on there, and then I use a pry bar sort of up against the sump bolts, sort of like that. And I lean against it like that, and that should, yeah, that's cracked that nut. So that's sort of how I do them, because they are really hard to get to. And then the outer ones you can get to from the engine bay. All right, so I got all 4 of those nuts out, and now I've just got my trusty transmission jack set up under the sump with a block of wood. If you're doing this at home on a jack, sort of the same theory is the same thing. So you'd still want to put your jack under the sump with a block of wood. And as you start to jack it up, you should see some separation in the mount. Let's just see what happens here. There you go. You can see it coming up. So I will note that you do need to have the engine cover off when you do this as well, because the engine cover does hit the firewall and you can break it. So now just got to lift this up a bit more to sneak those mounts out. You can actually see how broken that mount is in there now. We've got a bit of pressure off it, and we'll get those mounts out. All right, old mounts are out. You can actually see how broken this one is. That's the passenger side one. So whenever you accelerate, it's just gone bang and sort of hitting that middle rod under there. You sort of don't want that. That's what it looks like with no mounts in it. So we'll sit the new ones in there, lower the engine back down, make sure you do it slowly to line up all of the studs on the mounts to go through all their holes. And yeah, we'll put it back together. All right, sort of just jumped ahead and finished it. But that's what it looks like with the new mounts in it. All the nuts are in, everything's all bolted up tight. And now you can see the difference between the height of the sump compared to the K-frame. So the sump is above it. So that should be a little bit of an upgrade as far as engine mounts go. Definitely anything is going to be better than what was in it, given how bad they were. But yeah, these being a solid rubber, they should withstand a bit more abuse. So anyway, now that that's done, now we can drop it down and pull the front bar off, and yeah, start doing this trans cooler. And I also want to see what I can do about some of this damage here and see if I can clip this grill back in. We do have another front bar Rio off for it off Jason's donor car, which is that VX. Just gonna see if we can make that work as well and try and straighten that headlight. But anyway, you've seen me pull front bars off my Commodore before. This is gonna be no different. So we'll drop it down and get the bar off it. All right, so I'm gonna go through and pull the front bar off now so we can do the transmission cooler. I'll show you what we're doing with that once we get it apart. Once the front bar's off, I will try and see if I can push that out a little bit. The reinforcement behind is stoved in, so we've got this second-hand one off Jason's VX. So we'll see if we can put that in. This lower grill is all unclipped and coming out, so we'll see if we can sort that out a bit, and then just generally try and make it sit a bit better. You know, there's screws and stuff missing, so yeah, just see what we can do, see if we can do something with this headlight. I don't know, we'll just get into it and see. All right, so I got the front bar off. I've already jumped ahead a little bit and sort of clipped all this back in. I put a couple of screws from behind into the grill, as you can see, just sort of poking through there, just to sort of hold that bottom section back in. I heated this up from behind with a blowtorch and pushed it out a little bit, but I don't know, whatever. The front bar stuff, that's good enough. I have jumped ahead a little bit as well. So these are the hoses we ran earlier. I've also now got a wire hanging out there. What I've actually done is the low, so I've got 2 fans on the radiator, a big and a small. So that's high speed fan, and the small one is the low speed fan. I've tapped in a fuse into the factory relay, and I've put a switch on the dash. Right there, I've utilized these 2 holes where the original gas stuff was. So what that basically does now is flick that switch and the low speed fan will come on a switch. And I'm also gonna put a small thermo fan on the transmission cooler. This is the transmission cooler we're using. So this is something else that I've had around. I do apologize for the noise in the background, got some pressure washing going on. I've also got this little 12-volt fan here, so I'm going to try and mount that to that, sort of like so, and connect it up to that wire. So when you flick the switch on, like so, we get this fan going, and we'll get the transmission fan going. That's the plan anyway. So what we're going to do first though is pull this damaged reinforcement bar off, see if the VX one will fit. Hopefully the ends of the rails aren't bent. See if I can do something with that headlight, and then we'll go about putting that in there. All right, I've jumped forward again. It's all installed, all done. So trans cooler is on. I've just used these brackets that hold the power steering cooler line, and I've just sort of used the 2 original bolts in the bottom, lined up with the holes in the trans cooler, and I've just done a couple of old tech screws in the top, and there's the Thermo fan on the back of it. So yeah, that should do a job of keeping the transmission cool, better than factory anyway. So we'll go through and put it all back together, and then we'll have to drop it down and recheck the transmission oil level. I'll see what I can do with this headlight. I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but we'll see. And we'll see if this Rio fits too. All right, we're all done. We're all back together. Just got to top up the transmission oil. You can see the trans cooler sneaking down in there. Actually looks pretty good. Everything's sort of sitting a bit straighter now. Headlight sitting a bit better. Now to secure the headlight, I know what you're thinking. Probably the right thing would have been to, you know, maybe do a couple of right angle brackets or something into the, you know, to support the headlight. And what I've done is actually the next best thing. It's probably just as good, if not better. And that is 3 screws straight through the radiator support panel, straight into the top of the headlight. One of them is actually a timber roofing screw. So that's fixed properly. Happy with that. So yeah, that's it. We'll just get off the hoist now and bring it forward, as there's still one more thing I need to do. All right, so that's all done. Front of the car's back together, and I've just moved it into here to put it on level ground to check the fluid, and we're actually going to go through and fit a manual valve body now. These things have a bit of an issue, not really an issue, but they've got a thing. If you've got the transmission in first gear and you get up to a certain RPM, the transmission will still shift to second, and likewise if you're holding second, get up to a certain RPM, it'll shift to third. So you can actually go through and fit a manual valve body to these to overcome that inside the transmission. They're about $500, or you can fit a poor man's valve body, which is just this little diode here. So this wires in at the ECU, and it basically gives you a similar thing of a manual valve body where you can hold gears without it shifting, and you can hit that rev limiter all day long until the engine blows up or overheats and get all of the mangs possible. So this little diode here, I'll see if I can focus on it. It's upside down. The number on this thing is an IN5408, so 1N or IN, and that basically wires in at the ECU. So to do this job, what you'll need is obviously to get one of these diodes. These cost about $1. You can get these from any electronic parts shop, J-Car, whatever. You will need a little bit of heat shrink, a cigarette lighter, you'll need soldering iron and some solder, a bit of insulation tape, razor blade, a couple of screwdrivers, and some side cutters. So first thing you want to do is go ahead and get this kick panel off. There is a Phillips head screw up in here. There's also another one down underneath this trim, but if you're lucky, you can slide this forward without having to take this sill cover off. All right, got the kick panel off. Now what you want to do is just push these tabs down and then slide the ECU forward to get the ECU out of its sort of little bracket there. All right, once that's out, you want to go ahead and grab your razor blade and cut through this little bit of tape here and here, just to give you a little bit more stretch on the wires. All right, once the ECU's out, you're going to be playing with the first plug and the second plug. If you've got this side of the ECU to you, the third plug you don't touch. And what you're looking for on the first plug is 2 wires. You've got brown with a yellow trace and then solid yellow, which I've cut there. And then you've got light green and yellow with a black trace, and you want to cut both of them. Once they're cut, I like to just put a little bit of tape around these sections just to hold that back all together, and then I'll show you what we're doing with these. All right, so I've taped up those little 2 things. Then what you want to do is sort of cut these down to length a little bit. The 2 solid wires become friends, so they get twisted together, and then the 2 striped wires become friends as well. And then you'll notice the diode has got a silver band on one end. This silver band goes to the end that's got the wires with the stripes. So I basically solder it on sort of like that. and then I slide the heat shrink over the whole thing, and then I'll heat shrink it all and encase it. All right, so that's all soldered up now. So now we'll get the heat shrink and slide it over the whole thing and seal it up, and then we'll tape it all up, and yeah, she'll be ready to go back together. Done, all back together, all taped up. That's all sorted. Now it's just a matter of clip that back into the housing, put the kick panel on, and no one is none the wiser. And last but not least for this episode, I've actually gone through and fitted a couple of gauges here that I sort of had as well. Just got a Speco oil pressure gauge. So it's actually got better oil pressure than my wagon. And then I've just butchered in this digital volt gauge there. And the oil pressure gauge just T-pieces off the factory pressure sender. Just down there. So I just thought I'd show you that quickly before I park it up again. Well, that's it, guys. That wraps up another episode on this thing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe. We are getting through a lot of stuff on this car, and there is not a heck of a lot left before we are ready to use it with what we want to do. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, please stay tuned as we are almost there. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Stay safe, be good.